Greetings to all of our colleagues and webinar attendees, and a very special and warm welcome to our three panelists this afternoon. We have with us Ms. Nyari Samushonga, CEO of WeThinkCode, and I've asked each of the panelists to introduce themselves properly as we go around the room in a minute. Emeritus Professor Barry Dwolatzky from the Joburg Center for Software Engineering and Wits University, both at Wits. So thank you, Professor Barry. And to Tiyani Nghonyama, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Geekulcha. And thank you to you, Tiyani. And of course, all three of our panelists are previous, and in one case, current IT Personality of the Year winners of IITPSA. So we are truly, truly honored to have the three of you with us today. Today, we are talking about careers in IT. I will ask a little later about how many potential entrants to the field we've got online, and also, anyway, so we'll go through with that. But let's do a quick, while I'm still busy admitting people, you can see I'm getting sidetracked here, apologies. So let's do a quick round around the room and ask you each to please introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into the meat of the webinar. So thank you to you all. Sit back and let's get on with it. Nyari, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to IITPSA for inviting me. My name is Nyari Samushonga. As Tony said, I'm the CEO of WeThinkCode. We're a software development academy, which is very passionate about today's topic, and that is getting more young people working in tech. And our emphasis is actually on young people that wouldn't ordinarily be in tech. So no prior coding experience, maybe not the greatest, fanciest matric results, possibly not feeling like a maths wizard. And our emphasis is on identifying that potential, training it up to be software developers, and pathwaying them into employment. So I'm looking forward to a quite robust and interesting conversation with the panel and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyari. Really good to have you with us. Professor Barry, please.
Hi, thank you so much, Tony, and hi to my fellow panelists. And looking at the names on the screen in front of me, really good to see some young and old friends here. My name is Barry Dwolatzky. I'm a Professor Emeritus at Wits. I've done various things at Wits. I've been head of software engineering. I launched something called the Joburg Center for Software Engineering that I'm still director of. I'm currently, and I launched the Tsimologong Digital Innovation Precinct in Braamfontein, and I'm currently head of, or a director of innovation strategy in the office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor. So that's who I am. And I have to say as well that Tiyani and his colleagues once gave me a nickname that I'm very proud of, and they called me the Grand Geek. So you can call me Grand Geek if you want. Thank you.
All hail the mighty Grand Geek. Thank you, Prof. Barry. And of course, Prof, well known to many, many of us, a mentor and a teacher and a friend. So really, really good to have you with us. Thank you. And last, but certainly absolutely no means least, and Tiyani, thank you for being forced on you to take the last spot, but please kindly introduce yourself. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiyani Nghonyama. I am the co-founder and COO of an organization called Geekulcha. So Geekulcha is basically a platform that creates and enables platforms for innovation for young geeks or young techies doing all things tech. So we bring in the excitation and the enlightenment of the digital and the tech space. But yeah. There might be some noise here and there. I am at a golf course right now, but I'm really looking forward to this session. Thanks.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Tiyani. That's really great. I see we, as Professor Barry has put it, old and young friends, or old and new friends on the webinar with us. And once again, welcome to you all. Many of my colleagues, either past and present in the structures of the Institute. So also great to have you. Many of our members, professional CIOs, etc. Really, really great to have you all on board with us. So to get the ball rolling, I think we're going to, and I really don't want to make this too rigid, So I'd like to ask our three panelists to kind of jump in as an, you know, I may direct a question initially at somebody, then please feel free to supplement it. So, you know, we're talking about careers in IT, and certainly as an institute, we're trying to encourage a lot of young folk to study in the world of IT, to you know, into the profession. We do have, what is the word I'm looking for, a deficit of people in the space, and we would certainly like to encourage that. So starting with you, Nyari, maybe you'd just like to give us your thoughts on, you know, why a career in ICT, and you know, what sort of subjects would you be starting with at school? You know, where should one be if you're going to university? What should you sort of be considering?
Well, I think the question, why a career in IT, in 2023, we would say, why not a career in IT, right? We're just getting to a point where every facet of our lives is so centrally shaped by digital technology. If you think of when I was growing up and we were using checkbooks, now you bank on your phone and you bank on your computer, and it's all digital. I don't know the last time I was in a branch. When you think of education, COVID-19 pushed even South Africa to rapidly digitize. When you look at health and how we are storing medical records. So IT has essentially become this tooling that if you know how to use it, you can work in just about any sector. And so it's a superpower that allows you to be in medicine, in mining, in engineering, in whatever area. And I think that that's why I would encourage people to come into IT, because it gives you not just an interesting entry point, but a potential to grow in multiple directions. On the issue of subjects, I was an accountant until I was 30 and then made the switch. So I think the other great thing that's happening is that IT is becoming accessible from many different starting points, because the ending points for IT are so broad. So I would encourage people to join it because it's shaping our future, and Africa especially needs to become more well-known for creating rather than just consuming tech. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Nyari. Prof. Barry?
So through my career, my long career, I've been very often asked by people whether they should go into IT and how they should do IT or computing. And I used to have a long story about what to do and whether you're the right person for it. I've changed my story since then. And I think that every single person on earth is in some way having to go into IT. There's two different flavors of it. There are those that are going to use it, and there are those that are going to build and drive it. So I think everyone should know something about computers and how they work and and feel comfortable in the digital world. And it's kind of almost a thing that we don't have to say to young people, because they just do it. You know, they're what we call digital natives, and they all are digitally literate, and they're doing stuff. And they say, if you want to know anything in the world of IT, ask a 10-year-old, and they'll tell you. And so that's a given. But there's still a lot about careers in IT. How do you go about building a career where you will not be a user or a super user, but you'll be a builder and an innovator and originator? And I've got quite a lot to say about how to do that. And I'll maybe talk about that a bit later. But I think everyone should know about computers and the digital. Some should decide if that's where they want to move their future and career. And we can come back to that in terms of the pathways that I think people should follow.
Thanks, Prof. I'd also like to come back to that, because I think we know we face some interesting challenges in terms of the educational space, particularly pre-tertiary. And without trying to sort of box anyone, it'd be interesting if we just explore that a little when, you know, perhaps going to a school that doesn't offer some of those subject choices. Tiyani, your opening thoughts, please, on this.
All right. So, you know, Albert Einstein did once say that I never worry about the future because it comes sooner than you think. So we live in a very smart, a very smart world that is growing. We live in a smart growing world. And that smart growing world demands us to be able to adapt to changes, to be able to ensure that we are ready for anything that comes. We have to be adaptive. We have to be proactive as much as possible. And with that, it does require someone to be able to have some sense of digital literacy. And, if we look at the UNESCO Digital Literacy Competence Framework, does speak about the need to ensure that one is able to utilize information, one is able to use tools to communicate. They need to have problem-solving skills, content creation, the ability to program as such. So in that sense, we then need to be thinking along the lines of as technology gets more advanced, as the future comes sooner than we think, are the people ready? We do have producers, we do have consumers, but sometimes there is a sense that we tend to have too much of consumers, or at least not such good consumers as such of these technologies. So and that really does need the reskilling, the unlearning if needed, and to ensure that everyone has got some sense of digital literacy. And it is a great opportunity to then come into the IT field, to be able to play a part in there. And some of the crucial things that one really needs to have, mathematics is important because it does help one to be able to understand, the process in problem solving. I think we tend to say or ask this question, when am I going to need mathematics? I think that's a wrong perspective in a bigger way, because you need to be able to have that ability of problem solving. And I think we'll talk more about this later, but from high school, I appreciate language subjects such as life orientation, because they get one started with soft skills, which are quite crucial in complementing your IT degree as well. But I think we'll talk about that later. Let me end it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Tiyani, appreciate that. So I think you've already sort of started leading into it, and Professor Barry spoke about it as well. Okay, there's digital literacy, and then there's looking at a career in IT. And maybe if we could just explore a little sort of some of the pathways to that, and just narrating the experience of my own very quickly. I have and he'll probably hate me mentioning it on this webinar, but a young man who studied IT. He went to a private school that did not offer IT as a subject, and I think they did have catch, but that was it. So when we look at our South African milieu and the educational context, how do we encourage young people to enter the profession when they may not have had any exposure or very limited exposure at school level, and they're now looking at possible tertiary qualifications, or Nyari, if we think of your kinds of programs and Geekulchas and so on, how do the people even know where to start looking, I think is my question.
I think that's a great question, Tony. I think, firstly, the world is changing. If you go back in time, there was a place where people picked a career coming out of school. And whether they went into a vocational institution or university or straight into work, they kind of picked a spot. And I'm going to be a banker, or I'm going to be a teacher. And likely 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, their growth was within that chosen vocation. So they came from an entry level in that first area and grew in that career. Now, on average, it seems people are staying in jobs 4 to 5 years, not decades anymore, which means within one lifetime, the opportunity, like Madonna, to reinvent yourself and start out as a teacher, start out as a nurse and cross over into something else is becoming increasingly common. And from my perspective, in the world of technology, it's a value add, because to have within technology, as we create solutions for everyone, people who have a very deep understanding of other pathways in life is useful. To be able to sit with someone, for example, who's a medical doctor and now has a competency of creating technology, if we're trying to create a medical solution, that intersection of domains becomes incredibly powerful. So I think one of the first things that I try to share with young people when I'm guiding on career choices is, don't necessarily think of a career as a decision you make now for the next 40 years, but think of it as a journey that will be scenic, a journey where, you make the decision today and then tomorrow presents itself a particular way, and then you adapt and you move. Because removing that sense of dire and single moment big decision for the rest of your life also kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. But then in terms of not having prior coding experience, I definitely hadn't used a computer at all at the point I left high school, not to create technology and not to consume technology. I just really hadn't used one. And so the key thing as well is that a lot of effort is being put into making computer tooling quite accessible for people without prior experience. And so there are people who are spending all their time making it easy to use, even if you're not, a grown expert. And so the bigger thing for me around tech is that what we're working with is analysis, is problem solving, and is logic. And mathematics is one place where you can get that, but it's not the only. I'm sorry, just there's someone who just walked into what should be a quiet room. So essentially, the key thing is if you're logical, if you're analytical, if you're a problem solver, you can contribute within a tech environment. And there isn't only one way to acquire that skill. So look for opportunities like WeThinkCode, like Geekulcha, like Codex, which are not asking, did you do it in high school? Show me a matric certificate. Have you got a diploma? But rather are saying, do you have the underlying attributes that make it possible for you to acquire the learning? And then also to understand that that first learning you have is a stepping stone to a lifetime of learning, be it in tech or elsewhere. And so to summarize it, the first career choice or where you begin is in no way a reflection of where you will end up. So just chill, it's gonna be okay. And the second one is that coding is about attributes, the diligence, the attention to detail, the analysis, and the logic. And those are honed in many different ways in life that are not necessarily in a computer science class in high school or university. And so if you've got those attributes and you're willing to put in the time, you can become a quite impactful technologist.
Thank you so much, Nyari. And maybe now this is going to be unfair because it's going to sound like I'm pitting you guys one against the other, but I'm not. I think it's in the interests of robust debate. So, Prof. Perry, I mean, and I know you've done many other things, but certainly very renowned for being a lifetime academic and strong in the field of tertiary education. You've taught all over the world. You've created the hubs and things like that. So maybe just from your perspective, and just by the way, Nyari, I mean, and anybody, I was useless at mathematics and I've been in IT 42 years, but well, not quite 34 years, sorry, whatever it is, but that's beside the point. And I did a coding course way back when, Van Salen Pritchard, and entered the field and never looked back. So maybe Prof. Barry, and look, I did do degrees, but not in IT. So Prof, from your point of view, just some thoughts, please.
And it's not going to surprise anyone if I say that the first prize is to get a degree, and to get a degree in something like computer science or engineering. So if you can, if you've got the marks, if you've got the opportunity, and you can go and spend 3 or 4 years at a university or more, learning in a very deep way about the content of the sort of digital technologies, then do that, because that's going to be a very powerful thing to have in your sort of repertoire of tools. But I understand, and I completely understand two things. I understand that there are many barriers to entry. It might be financial, it might be your matric marks, it might be other things. So, if you can't get into computer science, don't think that's the end of it and you'll never make it in the digital world, because a lot of people who don't do computer science still make it very well in that world. So I'm kind of saying, if you can, and you've got the opportunities, do it, because it'll give you the one element. And that one element is to have deep learning, deep understanding in terms of the content and the science of computing or whatever. But the other things are just as important. And Tiyani mentioned these, you know, problem solving, communication, team working, learning how to learn, learning how to sell are all important things. And you can acquire those in many ways, and maybe you don't even get those at university. So I think that, and I do see the world of skills in the digital world of skills as a huge pyramid. And you can enter the pyramid at the wide base, where you have people who have a certain level of skills and you need lots of them, or less numbers of people needing the skills more at the point of the pyramid. And there's no value judgment whether the point is better than the base. They're just different skills you need there. And then once you enter that, so your qualification will determine where you enter the pyramid. And then your kind of knowledge and many other reasons will drive you up the pyramid or into different areas of the pyramid. And I think that's lifelong learning. So there's the building a good foundation and then lifelong learning. And I have to say, I've been involved in computing for more than 50 years, believe it or not. And I'm still learning. I've just got a project where I have to learn a lot about the metaverse. Didn't know much about it, and now I'm becoming an expert in the metaverse. So there you go. I'm not young, and I'm still learning.
Thanks, Prof. And I think that also dispels both you and I the whole story about, you know, if you're old, you don't understand technology. And I'll have robust debates with my software engineering son about exactly that subject. But just give Tiyani a chance to speak on this one as well. And Professor, I'd like to come back between yourself and Nyari and Tiyani, just the whole concept of the formal academic edge. I'm not suggesting that WeThinkCode and Geekulcha and so on are not formal, but, you know, perhaps the more traditional formal kind of educational roles. And you know, does it arm one better for a career? Because, as I say, my own experience, and it's not about me, it's just to use it as purely as an example, is I studied to be a school teacher, lucky for all the children that I never actually became one. And I moved into IT and never looked back. And yes, I did other degrees afterwards. But I think, you know, the challenge we face in this country is, as you say, access to education, the costs attached to it, you know, and so on. And I'd just be interested to know, how do we deal with that actually dichotomy, or what they say, cognitive dissonance, you know, between the two? But we'll come back to the moment. Tiyani, some thoughts from you, please.
All right, perhaps just the first thing there, you know, Geekulcha does not necessarily foster or champion non-degree education as such. We're actually quite strong on both. But you know, so well, myself, I learned how to use a computer in university, and at the same time had to learn how to code. You know, so what I've found was, you know, it becomes easier if you develop passion for it, and you need to know why. You know, your why must always be a motivator into that. So unfortunately, you have to start with the why, and then the what will follow. You know, so why do you want to go into the world of IT? You know, and then from there, the what will start to map out the search. Passion on top of things is always key. be passionate about the world of IT. I'm still a developer, and hence I'm here in Cape Town for a project. I still write code. I think about code. Sometimes I just have a nightmare of a system. I remember I was in Lesotho 2 weeks ago. I had a nightmare, and then 3 a.m. I was writing code to build a system to essentially avert that nightmare as such. So always have that motivator, love it, and then also get interested into it and never lose interest. And that will then start to shape your journey in terms of what kind of an IT person do you want to be? What are you building? And at the end, you will then be able to find that thing that help you to be able to contribute to society through IT as such. I think the need to contribute to society should be a bigger goal. But then, there's nothing like a sense of fulfillment. Legacies are also important. We've got the grand geek there who has, the likes of Tsumuloko. And I've read this book, some of the things that he has done are amazing, So the passion, and then we have to ask ourselves, what legacy are we leaving behind? But from time to time, I'm sure Prof. Berry does get to ask himself a question like, am I the fire or just the flame? So you will get such a feeling in IT, whether you are really making a difference, or is this really for you as well? And there are so many conferences, it can get overwhelming. And especially for someone who is starting, you will look everywhere. There's, blockchain, there's, cybersecurity, mobile apps development, there's React, there's Flutter, there's Kotlin as such. So it does get overwhelming, but if you really understand why you want to get into IT, your what in terms of focus will then start to shape up for you. I think I'll end it there.
Tony,
Thanks, Tiyani. Sorry, Tiyani.
Because, and I think you had already started to muddy the water and saying, Prof. Barry and I were likely to disagree. So I'm going to venture in. This is my sense. When we talk about diversity, we talk about it in the ways that are obvious. Tony is a man, Nyari is a woman. Tony is white, Nyari is black. And we want diversity, by which we mean this panel has 3 men, let's have more women. This panel has, I actually think there is a place in the world of software for computer science graduates. I think there's a place and there's something that they bring. But I think while they are necessary, they're not sufficient for creating great technology. And I think that's where the question of whether first prize for someone going into technology should be in university with a computer science degree or not, which is, I think learning in a university isn't for everyone. I didn't go to one. I think sitting and getting information from a lecturer isn't for everyone. I think filling up on a lot of theory before you practice isn't for everyone. I think for the people that do that, they have a certain insight, perspective, way of working that we all benefit from. But for those of us that are not wired that way, there are alternate paths. And I don't think that then makes the path we took kind of like a good plan B. I think it's a great plan A, that when you then create a team that has racial diversity and gender diversity, but also has learning path diversity and deep domain knowledge diversity, you create a convergence that makes beautiful things. And so this is why when we have conversations about what is the path into technology, and I love what Tiyani said about the passion of it, which is, if you're sitting there and you haven't studied it in high school, or if you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't really want to be in a university, I don't think when you take a path like a WeThinkCode, where for 16 months of your life, 40 hours a day, you're trained to code and the theory is over here and the practical is immediately over there, you're in a plan B because you couldn't go to university. Many of our students chose this path because they preferred a peer-to-peer environment, they preferred a very hands-on practical environment, and many of the people that hire them speak of the value of that and the courage of that and how they've spent so much time coding in their particular way. those self-same students will share with you how they value someone with a computer science degree, some of whom then come into WeThinkCode after, and how their understanding of the computing and what Prof. Barry was describing helped them grasp a particular concept. So I think similar to what I was saying about how the world is changing and careers aren't what you choose at 18 and have to stick with until you're 65 in retirement, but rather there's a starting point and you shift and you find your way. And as Michelle Obama would put it, you are becoming, more of yourself as you journey through, is what I encourage. So I don't think someone should feel like if university isn't for them, either because of constraints or very often because of choice, they should feel like, oh no, maybe I'm not going to make it. Maybe I won't be as effective. Because I think teams are better when you've got someone from academia, someone from straight university, someone who's taken learned in the hard knock streets of life, like I think I did. I think all those people come to the table and we build things that are useful. So I want to encourage people to try and look at that and say what fits for you, to also look at different people that took different journeys and see which pathways have resonance for you and choose, because you can be as impactful, as effective, as fulfilled on different roads. And we need to move away from this sense of, I leave high school, I go to university, then I pick a job, and then I start here, and then I go there, and rather say what's right for me. And if what's right for you is this way, then go that way. And if halfway through you discover that Nyari doesn't want to be an accountant anymore, shift, change, go that way, and that's a good thing. And I think I bring different things to the team as a financial person who then comes into technology than someone who was always a technological person. And I respect them and they respect me, and then together we make magic. And so I think there's a depth of diversity conversation beyond the, physiological diversity that we start to talk about in terms of learning paths and building technologists. And I encourage young people to be more open-minded in those ways.
Thanks, Nyari. Now, having checked the rock in the pond, I'm going to ask us to move on because I'm just sensitive to time and there are some interesting questions and comments coming up on the chat. But maybe if we could just quickly, before I respond to some, or ask you to respond, I don't, ask you to respond to some of them, is, so we've now decided that, and I do agree, and certainly I think we can agree between us that there are roles for both avenues or many avenues, and they will all work in this great context. I think that the next question is, so we've now decided, or maybe we haven't decided totally, but we're kind of moving into the IT field. And people ask me, sort of career kind of sometimes happens by happenstance rather than by deliberation or deliberate thought. But that being the case, or not being the case as it may be, so we've got the young people, they're possibly studying IT, maybe they're still at school, maybe they're in university. What sorts of careers would you recommend that they should be looking at? And I know there's a vast plethora of them, and people want to talk about cybersecurity and AI and what. And I know they want to introduce robotics and coding at school. But really, maybe just to give a sense to the people on the call as to what kind of fields they could or should be looking at. We all know that IT today is very different from was when I started and Prof. Barry started. Some of the jobs today, many of the jobs today and the careers and roles today didn't even exist when we started. We didn't even know about them. So how does one sort of deal with that kind of thing? And then I have an interesting question here, which I'd like to throw in the pool as well, from a lady named Lisa, who says, how would someone go about moving from teaching programming into working in IT instead? So we'll just kind of throw that into the equation as well. But if we could give a sense to the audience, the webinar people, attendees, of what should they be considering as for terms of careers in IT, please. Prof. Barry?
Yeah, and it's something that I deal with almost every day. I have people saying my child or my grandchild is finishing school and they want to go into IT or digital, and what should they do and what should they focus on? And it's become a very hard question, and it's a hard question to answer because I think the career guidance, if you want to give it a name, is very weak. So people don't know, people say, I want to be involved in computers. But the parents, the teachers, the people around them have no idea what jobs there are in computers. How do people work in the digital world? What are there? And then they pick up, some a random article appears in a newspaper about robotics or cybersecurity or something, and all these young people and their parents then get super excited. Oh, we should do cybersecurity because that's a thing. So I think there's a very big gap in terms of how people get to understand what this very diverse, and I love the point made by Nyari, it's a diversity, it's a team sport. There's everyone in, from the philosophers and the legal experts to the people cutting code and people doing testing are all as important. There's no one less or more important. Is a fullback more important than a goalkeeper or more important than a center forward? It's a team. You won't win a game unless you have everyone. So it is about diversity, but how do people decide? That's the difficult thing. And, I think people flounder around a lot and sometimes make a choice that they can't go back on. So someone sort of heads off in a particular direction, and 10 years later they say, oh, I should have done this. And I think the one choice that I do find people regretting, and I come back to this, is if you don't go to university and you go off in a particular direction, and 10 years into your career, you think, oh, I should have done a degree. I should have got a formal kind of qualification in what I'm doing. And it's very hard mid-career to say, well, I'll go back and I'll do a 3-year degree in something. So I think that the right moment to do that formal tertiary education is straight after school. And maybe you do a year or two and think, oh, this isn't for me, and you move on. Not a big problem. But it's quite hard to say, I'm going off to work, I'll work for 10 years, and then I might go back and do university. Very few people do that. And I meet a lot of people regretting that they didn't do that at the beginning of their career rather than midway through. So that's just a thought on that.
Try unmuting myself. Thanks, Barry. All of us, someone's going to do it at least once. I'll be the one to do it. Nyari, I know you're dying to speak, but I'd like to give Tiyani a chance just to say a word. I can see it. I can see you champing at the bit there. So I'll ask you to hold it for a minute or three, and maybe just ask, because the time, we're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 of these, I suspect. So brace yourselves, panelists. But in the meantime, Tiyani, your thoughts on, what careers should people be looking at, and how to get into it. You've obviously got some background noise there, so we'll just let the audience know it's not Tiyani's fault. He's down there on a task, so we'll just have to forgive him for that. Thanks, Tiyani.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so in terms of the type of careers in IT to be looking at, and this is mainly based by the evolution of the tech ecosystem. You've got a lot of frameworks that are making things easier, but what's really missing is the architectural design of software that seems to be going down a bit, and it needs so enterprise architecture, whether it's design, whether it's development, that is really quite crucial as well. We should not neglect networks and communications, because there are a lot of projects that are emerging. If you look at the Square Kilometer Array Africa, that's a big opportunity, and there should be professionals from South Africa having to work on such projects. So and then another angle, obviously, cybersecurity, but then to also answer that question around, how can someone get into IT security, hence they had not worked in IT for 15 years. So There's a sense that security, cyber security or information security is really an IT thing, you know. So it is not necessarily, cyber security is not necessarily an IT field as such. Yes, it does help to understand some basics, but cyber security is quite broad. And you can get into cyber security without having an IT background as such. So you can get into the field of research around that, but it is definitely possible to be able to get into the cybersecurity scene. And then, I've mentioned networks, but then complemented by that as well. With the experiences of COVID-19, there are a range of things are needed to within organizations, enterprise solutions, whether it's mobility, of which, yes, mobile apps are still in demand, so you can get and to become a mobile app developer as such. But I want to also end on this point. But on this point, firstly, I must give a shout out to WeThinkCode. I think the way that they have approached things and the way of teaching really get the students to understand the architecture of development beyond the surface. But we need to also be clear between a software engineer and a software developer as such, which is quite essential to differentiate, and it does still need more people to get into it. Obviously, if you're looking at a software engineer, this is a person that really goes beyond the surface. They actually get to set a design for the architecture. They get to ensure that all the test cases, even the documentation of the specifications are well aligned to the requirements, whereas a software developer interprets requirements or technical specifications and then develops a solution as such. So system engineer may go beyond that, but a software engineer really need to ensure that they've got a grasp understanding of the underlying factors. But if you are to get into software development, you still need to be able to understand networks. You need to be able to ensure that you have got a basic sense of understanding on security as well. And then a software developer also has and perhaps this is an advice to those who are already in the IT field, to ensure that you're always profiling your work, use of Git platforms, whether it's GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket as such. That is your online portfolio. And it is quite crucial to ensure that you're always profiling your work, because hiring managers, I am one of the hiring managers, by the way, we actually get to check whether you understand the basics of Git, and not only that you have an account, but have you contributed code into that as well. So in an essence, those are some of the things that you will then have once you have gotten into the field. But software development is still big, and obviously artificial intelligence, if you can get started there from artificial intelligence and then get to machine learning and ultimately deep learning as such. Amplified intelligence is still quite big as well. So we might really want to pay attention to that. And my personal favorite, optical physics and tech. That is another sector of which, yes, to eventually look at the metaverse solutions as such. Yeah, I think I'll end there.
Thanks, Tiyani. I was actually going to ask if we could also just, and simply, and that's great. A lot of really great ideas in the board thinking. I'm sensitive to the fact we've only got 10 minutes left and we've barely scratched the surface, which is not surprising because it is such a broad area, and many of us, and yourselves included, got lots of experience. And Nyari, just to take you to task, you said you didn't study at university. You didn't study at university in IT. Yes?
I did my degree by correspondence. I wasn't in a university.
Okay. All right. Now you're splitting hairs.
I did it in, I was in boarding school for 6 years. The idea of being in an institution, literally, Tony, it was a big fight with my mom. It just, I wasn't going to go. And then I didn't study IT. But I think what I will say about the careers, the way I think of IT is as a tool. So IT is a tool we use to solve different problems, and maybe let's say a toolbox. And that toolbox has different ways of solving different kinds of problems. So in making a decision about where to go, whether it's networks or software development or cloud computing, I think one of the things that can be helpful is to look at which kinds of problems you're interested in solving, and then working backwards and saying, well, which sector of tech puts me in a position to solve those kinds of problems? So what interests you? So for example, if you're more of a creative and the visuals matter to you, then things like user experience and front-end development and mobile development might be more appropriate. If you're a person who's interested in tinkering with the back of how things work and optimizing them and things like that, certain areas of back-end development might be better for you. If you're a person who's interested in analyzing information and finding out stories from patterns, then maybe data analytics might be more appropriate for you. So I think one of the things that I've found useful is to try and say, which areas interest me? And if those areas interest me, which kinds of tools, impact those areas? Which kind of technical tools impact those areas? And pick it from that perspective. So I think that's one way to reason with it. The other thing that I think is really cool is the access to playing with tech. So you can actually now, you don't have to commit and say, I'm interested in cybersecurity and then go 10 years into cybersecurity. You can figure out how to get things online that allow you to play with it and make projects and do things like that and get an exposure and see if what's written on paper about cybersecurity that interested you, if you stay interested after you've spent a day or two actually trying to create a solution. So I think that's the other thing, is immersion. And then the final thing I'll say is I don't think there are any shortcuts to mastery and impactful contribution. So whichever path it is, I think that there needs to be an inherent commitment to actually building a knowledge base and a mastery that allows you to contribute well. So if you're looking for a shortcut, you might end up a little bit, of that bee in the garden, from one shiny, pretty flower that smells nice to the next. But the idea must be maybe a broad exposure to start. And then as you start to see the things that you enjoy, a deepening of that knowledge and it's inevitably going to take you many years to master anything and contribute impactfully. And so I think to the conversation about retirement and that, that's exactly why now people into their 70s and 80s, you can still be, and you should still be contributing. We're living longer, we're sharper for longer. And so this idea that you can branch out, find things that interest you, and then deepen your knowledge in those areas, and then also still leave room to change your mind, because that's also a beautiful thing.
Thank you, Nyari. And I'm sorry, we really are running out of time. So I'm I'm monitoring the questions on the chat, and I see Tiyani was as well, and I suspect the other panelists also. So we've literally only got 6 minutes left. And as I say, we really haven't scratched the surface. So maybe just Prof. Barry, if we come to you for a moment, and maybe if we can just get a sort of concise response on this. The question asked from Beyonce Magagula is, since IT or computer science is such a broad industry, how does a student straight from high school choose which career path to follow? And I think you did allude, in fact, all three of you have in one way or another alluded to that, but Prof, some thoughts from you, please?
So I think really following up from what the other two panelists have said, I think follow your passion. Don't worry about a career path. Your career is going to take many interesting twists and turns. Young people today might live to be 120 or 150, and they might be working for 100 years. So don't worry about where you're heading sort of ultimately, but really follow something you're passionate about. I just want to say something very quickly, and that is that the sort of buzzword of Fourth Industrial Revolution, which I hate, but the other word is digital transformation. And digital transformation is really not about technology. It's about how you innovate businesses or how you innovate business processes. And that's where the interesting things are happening. I'm very sad to say that I think before long, these kind of AI systems like these monstrous chats, GPT and all of that, will soon be writing code better than any human can write. So don't, maybe coding is something important now, but not for long. But we'll need humans to innovate, to look at businesses, say, how do we make them digital? And how do we bring digital technology in? And that's a human endeavor. And people should prepare themselves for that, for where you contribute to innovation in the broader sense.
Thanks, Prof. And I know I'm the moderator, so I'm not really supposed to comment, but just a quick thought which struck me when I saw the question. I mean, we're thinking a lot of people say they're keen to study medicine, and they go and study medicine with, they don't really, I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a something. And I met a surgeon the other day, a female surgeon who's in a, and I'm going to say this because it's nothing wrong with it, she's a colorectal surgeon. So one of my questions to her was, how on earth did you get that as a specialization? And her answer was, when she was doing her residency, she worked with a really great mentor. And that stimulated her passion, her whatever, to actually become it. And as she's at a teaching hospital, a very good one here in Johannesburg. And as I understand it, that's how it came about. So we are running out of time. Nyari, maybe to ask you quickly, I see Tiyani's off screen at the moment. With the last minute or two we have left before I ask you to round off, the question is asked, how do you go about applying for internships or, entry-level kind of jobs in the fields? Any advice for our delegates online, please?
So it's a really interesting one, and there's complex layers. There's a lot of information out there, and it's a tricky one to say. But I think similarly, it's almost like begin with an outcome in mind. So when you look at what you're interested in doing, then narrow it down and then look at a few organizations that work in that space. So if you're interested, for example, working in the financial sector in IT, then you start to look at some of the financial companies and see what they have available to intern in that respect. It's a challenge a little bit to get the internships without some entry point of training that's correlated to that. Because obviously when anyone who's worked a full-time job, when you're taking in interns, taking in somebody as an intern is a responsibility to coach them and mentor them, and the extent of the gap between their first ability to contribute and when they walk in the door is a bigger responsibility. But I think, yeah, it's again aligned to the interest areas. Look at the organizations that you're interested in, and many of them will have some manner of internship, and then they will share context on what the qualification criteria is to be eligible for that. And in that, prepare those things and give yourself as good a shot as possible to be eligible to enter.
Thanks, Nyari. And maybe on a different subject, Prof, because we are running out of time, is as one of our illustrious researchers on the skills survey annually between the Joburg Centre for Software Engineering and IITPSA, there's our free advertisement. What skills do you think are in demand right now, and what do you foresee coming in the near future, please? The 1 minute.
So we've seen no surprises over the last few years. Things like coding, things like project management, business analysts, data scientists have come up. So I think that we still need, the IT sector in South Africa is crying out for skills, and they're crying out for good, solid skills. And as Nyari says, there's no shortcut. So, we need the skills that require deep skills, and that's things like coders, developers, those sorts of things.
Thanks, Professor. And as we are almost out of time, Tiyani, I believe, is still with us. So Tiyani, just perhaps to ask you to close off your closing thoughts on the realities of careers in IT and what kinds of things people should be looking at in terms of your experiences, please. And briefly,
right,
because it is 5 o'clock.
Yes, indeed. So a critical thing is that you need to start looking at doing, so learn by doing, sharpen your skills. So if ever you want to go through a certificate, you're going through WeThinkCode or any tertiary institution, from the very beginning, start by learning, by doing, get exposed. And don't be an IT person who has never heard of a thing called IT web, for an example. So ensure that you are keeping up with an industry as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiyani. And I'm really sorry we're out of time because there's just so much to talk about in this kind of space. Unfortunately, I don't think we can get to all the questions, but certainly all the areas that we wanted to cover. And I really do think we may need to look at a follow-up. We've got Lee Angelo, our faithful organizer, public relations marketing associate online. So we'll chat with Lee as well and our three panelists and see if we perhaps can't set up a follow-up session if you folk don't mind. What I'm also going to do in a moment is I'm going to put my own email address, my business email address on the chat. If there are any additional questions which you'd like us to consider at a future event of this nature, please let us have them. And then as we are over time, I'm just going to take my turn quickly to say thank you so much to our three panelists. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I know, as I say, we barely scratched the surface or the tip of the iceberg, but to Nyari, Prof. Barry, Tiyani, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your knowledge and so on. To those of all of our delegates, attendees who've commented on the chat group, who've asked some questions, thank you. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize. Time has run out on us. I have done my best to sort of try and cover some of the areas, and we will definitely be looking at a follow-up session in the not too distant future. So any quick last, one sort of 5 seconds, Prof?
No, just a big thank you and looking forward to a great 2023. And we're going to do great work together, I'm sure.
Amen. Nyari?
Sharing Prof. Barry's comments. Thank you all. Really enjoyed the conversation. And I think it's always scary before you start. So just start and then figure it out afterwards. Just start.
And also to embarrass Nyari one last time, we welcome you as a new IITPSA member. So thank you, Nyari.
Thank you, Tony.
And Prof. Barry, a long-standing IITPSA member. So thanks, Prof. Tiyani, your very last thank you, goodbye, whichever.
No, thank you so much, colleagues. Prof. Barry, Nyari, yourself and everyone for the comments and questions. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiyani. And once again, thank you to our attendees for joining us. We do appreciate it. And we look forward to engaging again with you in the near future. And of course, there's a lot of information on our website, iitpsa.org.za. So please keep an eye on that. If you're members, watch our newsletters. And we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Take care, have a good evening, and God bless to all.